What is up, guys? Once again, we're back talking about precious stones. In this video, we want to talk about a metamorphic rock. A very beautiful and unique stone called Lapis lazuli, or you could say the short version, Lapis. Just like plenty of other gemstones, Lapis is an extremely old stone that formed for millions of years until we found it. Throughout history, humans using this stone has a very long history itself. It has been more than 7,000 years since humans discovered it and started using it for different purposes, and it's mainly found in ancient India and Egypt. Until then, Lapis didn't have a true mine, so they would find different pieces throughout the world and bring it back to their kingdom to use. The history of the first Lapis mine that was found around the world was around 2,700 years ago in modern-day Badakhshan in Afghanistan. If you've seen our video about turquoise, you're familiar with this mask. An ancient mask called Tatun Khatum, which was an ancient Egyptian pharaoh with a lot of gold and a lot of gemstones. This beautiful mask was formed a very long time ago. Of course, there's other gemstones, but around the eyes and the eyebrows, you can find lapis. Lajavard is the original Persian name in ancient times. When it entered the Arabic language, it turned into Lazavard, and of course through the Arabs, they took it to Europe, and that's where it turned into lapis, and in English, you still call it lapis. In Farsi, this word means the sky or heaven, and Persian poet Peridot says, as the sun struck the dome of lazuli, a golden curtain was drawn most truly. In this poem, lapis is referred to as the sky or heaven. Throughout history, the Badakhshan mine was the most important lapis mine in the world. From the other side, this stone would go to India and China, and from the other side, it would go through the Middle East to the Egypt and Europe. Even though the mine was found 2,700 years ago, but it has been used for much longer than that. The Akkadians used it, the Assyrians used it, the Babylonians and the Sumerians, and they have written about it. The statue you're seeing comes from Sumeria around 4,400 years ago, and its eyes is made from lapis. This statue is located in the Louvre Museum in France. The experts that studied this statue say the lapis that is used in the eyeball came from Badakhshan, Afghanistan. So that shows the Sumerians knew that this place has a lot of lapis, but they weren't familiar with mining an area. Ancient Egyptians known lapis as a good luck stone, and they would usually wear it as a necklace. When the ancient Romans took over Egypt, they see something and write it down. They would write when Cleopatra would wear makeup, one of the many things she did was put blue eyeliner, which was made from lapis dust. In Christianity, lapis is known as Virgin Mary's stone. There is a lot of writings in the Old Testament by Jewish people about sapphire. Of course, you guys know sapphire is one of the precious gemstones, which there's only 4 of them. It's a very beautiful, distinct color. But back in the day, they would mistake lapis lazuli with sapphire. Jewish historians refer to the sapphire in the Old Testament and say they were talking about lapis lazuli. What is lapis made up of anyways? Of course, like any other stone, there's a whole lot of different molecules, but it consists a lot of sulfur. The blue color comes from sulfur as well, but that's only if there is 3 sulfur atoms on one molecule, which is called trisulfur. But if the sulfur atoms are 2 or 1, they don't create a blue color, but rather a distinct yellow color. It's interesting to note that there is a unique version of lapis that has 4 sulfur atoms per molecule, which looks red. So what can we use lapis for? Between different types of gemstones, lapis is very easily polished, and they've known this since back in the day because it was very forgiving to work with, and that was the reason they would sometimes mistake lapis with sapphire. But sapphire is extremely rare compared to lapis, and of course much more expensive, and that's why sapphire is part of the 4 precious gemstones, and lapis is not. Do you see the statue? It came from 2600 years ago from ancient Egypt. It's 100% made from lapis lazuli, and it's basically the god of industry in ancient Egypt, a god called Pita. It really is a god of industry the way they worked on it, because they took a whole piece of lapis and carved it into the statue, and that's quite impressive. It's very small too, it's only 5.5 centimeters. But let's get to know the stone itself a little bit better. Which ones are the most expensive? If the piece of lapis is not uniform in color and it's very random like this and it's missing blue colors, it's the least quality one and it's not that expensive. The more beautiful the color and uniform it is, the price goes higher and higher, kind of like this, where it's a very pure blue color and it's not changing colors drastically. Lapis is not made in a lab, but it does have a cheaper version, a stone called sodalite. Sodalite kind of resembles lapis, and if you don't know what you're looking for, you could mistake it for lapis, but it's extremely common compared to it, and that is why it's much cheaper. So if you're buying lapis, make sure you do your research so you don't get scammed and buy sodalite without knowing. Lapis is sold by grams, unlike other precious gemstones and gemstones, which is sold by carats. Carats is basically 0.2 grams. You can't really calculate a piece of lapis in your head because it could have a price of $5 per gram, or it could go as high as $25,000 per gram, and it all has to do with the quality and the way it looks. The best kind of lapis, just like we said, comes from Badakhshan, Afghanistan. But of course, there are other mines around the world that have this stone. Mines in Russia, Italy, the US, and Myanmar. In different religions around the world, they have their own certain beliefs about lapis lazuli, which we won't get into in this video because this is not a religious channel. Before we let you go, please comment and let us know what you think about this precious stone. Once again, we're back talking about another gemstone, something we've probably heard of but don't know much about. Peridot, or some people like to call it Peridot. This is the formula for peridot, and it's mainly consisted of iron and magnesium. The more iron there is inside this gemstone, the greener it gets, and it's vice versa. The less iron it has, the lighter the green gets, and it seems more yellow. But for it to actually turn more yellow, it needs to have more chromium inside it. And if you've seen our video about chromium, you'll know why it creates that green color. Most gemstones are created in Earth's crust, but just like diamonds, peridot is created inside the mantle, which is deep beneath Earth's crust right here. So what you're saying is that humans dug all the way down there to pull this peridot out? No, it's not like that, because that would be crazy. The peridot got hand delivered to us, but it took a long time because it came with a volcano. So anywhere on Earth you can find peridot, there's probably a volcano nearby. There are other methods that you can get peridot as well, Like for example, this is a peridot that was taken out of a meteor. These types of peridot are extremely rare, but you can still find them. And to know where it came from is pretty much impossible, because these asteroids were coming from space for probably millions of years, and they crash landed on Earth without burning up in the atmosphere. And millions of years later, we found them. So it's quite impressive that we actually have these. You can find these peridots everywhere too, like in China, in the US, which are completely different sides of the world, but you can find the same material. Usually the most common way you can find peridot is between basalt rock. These rocks are created inside a volcano, and when it erupts, it comes out and hardens. So that is the reason you can find peridot inside them. Do you know what place consists the most amount of peridot? Right here. It's in the Red Sea, and it's called the St. John's Island or the Zebarjad Island. This is a very small island and it belongs to Egypt. Around 300 BC, it was the first time that the Egyptians started using this gemstone for their jewelry, and they first found it on this island. The biggest peridot was also found in this island. It's a 311 carat piece, which is insane. And right now you could see it in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. In terms of countries, the most amount of peridot you can find is in the country of Afghanistan and Pakistan. But in terms of density, it's mostly in the Zebarjad Island. But for reserves, these two countries win the cake. You could say that peridots were the kryptonite of emeralds. It is insane that you can mistake peridot with emerald, which is a highly precious gemstone, and it's much rarer and much more expensive. Even in ancient Egypt, where emerald was extremely valuable, sometimes they mistake peridot with emeralds. When they tested some of Cleopatra's jewelry, they realized that some sections it had peridots instead of emeralds, and that was by mistake. You can't mistake all peridots with emeralds. It's only a rare amount that looks very similar to emerald, and you could imitate it. If you look at peridots under the microscope or a magnifying glass, you could find some black spots. These black spots are called stress marks, and you could say this is an indicator that for sure tells the jeweler or whoever that's checking it, this is a piece of peridot, and you can't mistake it with any other gem. If the experts cannot find these stress marks or black dots, there is another method they could use. There are these needle-like cracks inside peridot that indicates that this is genuine peridot, and it's not something like emerald or anything else. Of course, all of these have to be looked at under a magnifying glass, and these are different methods jewelers use to tell these gemstones apart. Even though peridots were created deep in the Earth's mantle and they came out of a volcano, they do not like heat. If you give them too much heat, they could crack. Even if you put a piece of peridot inside your pocket and put your pants inside the washing machine, the heat of the washing machine could crack this gemstone, so you have to be very careful handling it. Just like we said, you can find plenty of peridot next to locations that have volcanoes, like St. John's Island, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, but they don't actually open up a mine and take it out of the ground. The most amount of peridot that's collected around the world is in this location, called Manchuria, China. Most of the world's peridot is from here usually. When the French first visited Egypt and they got familiar with peridot, they got familiar with the Arabic name for gem, which is Peridot. When they heard this, they used this name on peridot, and that is the reason it's called peridot, because that's what the French call it now. In English, you can call it peridot or peridot. The Romans were also introduced to peridot with the Egyptians when they took over, and when they saw it for the first time, they called it night emeralds, because unlike emeralds which are dark at night, peridots shine at night. There is another interesting story about the Zebarjad or St. John's Island that is good to know. When ancient Egyptians first visited this island, it was infested with snakes. But when they realized there's so many gemstones here, especially the peridots, they were willing to risk their lives for their leaders so they can collect these gemstones. And they visited here so much that they eradicated the snakes that used to live here. So there is no living animal on St. John's Island. You should be familiar with Hawaii because we've made a video on it. Hawaii is basically an island range that are all volcanoes, and millions of years ago they came out of the ocean floor, and that is why they're still mostly active. So that means there's a lot of peridot around this island. Native Hawaiians have a goddess named Pele. Pele is basically the goddess of volcano, and that is why they called peridots tears of Pele, because it comes out of the volcano. Unlike other gemstones like diamonds and sapphires, you can't find lab peridots. It might be because it's not insanely expensive like these 4 gemstones. That is why they don't create it in a laboratory, because it's not worth their time and money. So how much is this gemstone anyways? Compared to the 4 precious gemstones, it's much cheaper, especially when it's smaller. Of course, the quality and the size speaks for everything. On average, it's between $50 to $500 per carat, depending on the quality. There's a chance that a 1 carat gem could cost more than a 5 carat that's way low quality. So a 1 carat ring of peridot could cost $250 or $70. But the price could get crazy. Not for a 1 carat piece. When you go over 10 carats, that's when the price gets crazy. Like if you see a peridot ring with a 10 carat piece, it could cost around $17,000. So the bigger the gem gets and the quality stays the same, the price goes up exponentially. Like the 311 carat piece that's in the museum, you can't really put a price on it because it's by itself and there is nothing else you can compare it to. Just like a huge piece of diamond. Once again, we're talking about stones. We've already made videos about precious gemstones, which are these 4. Right now, we want to talk about regular gems, and we already made a few videos about them. In this video, we want to get to know a certain gem that is very popular throughout history, agates. Agate comes from the Greek word Agate, and everywhere in the world, the name of agate comes from the Greek word. A lot of people believe that agates were the first stones used as jewelry by ancient humans, and some even believe that around 100,000 years ago is when humans officially started using agates for beauty, because it was so common and it looked very beautiful. You can find agates pretty much everywhere in each continent. When we say everywhere, we're not talking about every square inch of the planet, but places that have a lot of rocks, like around volcanoes and mountainous areas, and even beaches. And that is why there is really no agate mine. The oldest agate that has been modified by a human is this one, which is a 15,000-year-old piece of agate that has been carved into a knife or something sharp where ancient humans used it. Humans have been using tools for a very long time, and it's interesting to know that agate is one of them. And the oldest jewelry that has ever been carved from agates is from ancient Egypt about 9,000 years ago. Any stone you find anywhere on Earth has a very long life. No stone can be formed in a short period of time. Like for example, diamonds had to go through extreme temperatures and pressures for this crystal to form from carbon, or any stone for that matter. Another interesting example is granite, which is about 300 million years old, and that is why granite is extremely hard, and it's one of the hardest stones to cut. Most of these stones are younger than agates. Agates are one of the oldest rocks ever found, and they're estimated to be more than 3.5 billion years old, and some even say they're 4 billion years old. As you probably know, the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, So having a stone that's 4 billion years old is extremely impressive. It's one of the first ones. Unlike other stones and gemstones, agates are very simple. They're basically made up of silicon oxide. If you've seen our video about silicon, you're familiar with this element and how common it is on planet Earth. This is the formula of agates as well, which is similar to quartz. Another difference between agates and other gemstones is that there's plenty of different versions, colors, and shapes. Like when you look at turquoise, they are all very similar in color and style, or emeralds for that matter. They're very much alike, but there's so many different agate versions that we can't show them all in this video. Agates are basically formed in the cavities of different stones. Just like we said, agates are made up of silicon oxide, so they're under the family of quartz. And the quartz formula is exactly this, silicon dioxide, which is the same thing as agates. And even though they're under the same family, but agates look much different than quartz. Just like we said, agates are formed in the cavity of other rocks, but how? Cavities that fill up with water. This water usually has silicon in it, and as you know, silicon is very plentiful on Earth's crust, so having water that has silicon element in it is very common. Millions of years ago, these cavities get filled up with water with silicon on it, and layer after layer they built up and built agates inside these cavities. When you look at agates, you could literally see the layers where the silicon oxide is building up, and the way the agate looks determines how it was built up throughout millions of years. And that is exactly the reason you see different looking agates. The patience of the planet and holding these waters in the cavities, look what type of beauty it has created. It is true that most agates are reddish orange, but that doesn't mean all of them are like this. You will find all types of colors, and the color all has to do with the environment it's formed in. Even though scientists know the exact formula of how agates are made and how they're actually formed throughout the years, but they've never successfully made one inside the laboratory. They've really tried to synthesize agates in the laboratory, but they've never been successful. Like for example, really expensive stones like diamonds and sapphires are made in the laboratory. And even though they don't hold the same value as the real rock, they have the same purity and they're even better because they're perfectly made instead of naturally made. But producing a cheap stone like agates compared to those two, they've never been successful. Just like we said, agates are part of the quartz family, and scientists can easily build quartz in a lab. And the quartz made in a laboratory are usually made for the main mirror of a telescope or a microscope, so they have to be perfectly made too. But since they have the formula, it doesn't mean you could do the same thing and get the same result for the agates, so they still are not able to build it. Later on, they might be able to build agates in the laboratory, but not yet. You might be asking, why would they want to build such a cheap stone inside the laboratory when they can just build diamonds? The main reason to do that is to make a perfect agate and to help us understand the history of our planet, because agates are one of the oldest stones ever found in human history, and it's interesting to know how the layers are formed exactly. Either way, agates are very common on the planet, and you could find them in every continent. Agates are very strong, and from the other side, they're very easy to work with, and that means you can cut them and form them to however you like. Unlike sulfur crystals, where if you cut it, it turns into powder. This is a 1400-year-old drinking horn made in China, and it's purely made from agates, and it's extremely impressive how they cut everything with the stone, so it's pure agate. And from the other side of the world, this is a vase from the Byzantine Empire, and this is also made from pure agate. How much are agates? Just like every other stone, it all depends on the quality and the cut of the stone. Most importantly is the color and the shape of the agate. Like for example, you can buy 1 carat of a certain agate for only 3 cents. But when you go higher and higher grade and better quality, it will go up in the 300s range. So where can I find agates on planet Earth? The most amount of agates you can find is on the beach or next to volcanoes. Do you know this lake is part of the Great Lakes and it's called Lake Superior? Around Lake Superior, you will find the highest quality agates in the world. It's also interesting to note that 10% of Earth's fresh water is inside this lake, and you will find the best, highest quality agates around this fresh water. In this video, we want to talk about another gemstone, pearl. Pearl is a gemstone as well, but instead of being made in Earth's crust, it's actually made inside a living thing. The formula that creates pearl is calcium carbonate, and you can see the formula on the screen. An original pearl has to be made in a natural place, but doing this is extremely difficult, and that is why humans have figured out different ways, especially in Indonesia, which produces the most amount of high quality pearls in the world. The best way for a pearl dealer is to pull out a pearl like this that has a diameter of 20 millimeters. When you get a pearl this size, it has a price of about $1,500. In the waters of Indonesia, you find the highest quality and the most expensive pearls in the world. If you find a pearl necklace made from these pearls we just showed you, it could be as high as $200,000 for that necklace. This is in a way where pearls don't have this type of price anywhere else because they're much smaller, and it has an average price of about $75 each, not $1,500. But it's not the water of Indonesia that helps them produce this type of pearl. It's the amount of work and dedication the workers put into it. So how do they produce the pearl inside these oysters? They basically engineer it in a way so after a few years it spits out a pearl like this. A normal oyster will give you a pearl every 3 months. But what kind of product? A low quality pearl that's small. And that is why to get a 20 millimeter pearl that's high quality, it will take around 5 years. The oyster they used in the waters of Indonesia is this, the Pinctada maxima. This oyster is only found in the South Sea, which is considered the southern part of the Pacific Ocean, around right here. The Pinctada hormida basically produces 1 pearl every time, but it takes 5 years like we said earlier. They don't all have plants in making pearls because 3/4 of these oysters die before they even make one. And that is why the farmers have to be extremely careful of these oysters so they don't die. The job starts in a laboratory where they produce baby oysters. They basically have to keep the oyster until it reaches puberty. To help the oysters reach puberty, they are fed planktons. When the oysters eat this much plankton, they easily grow up and they're ready to be dumped into the sea. When these babies are ready to enter the sea, more than 50% of them die. The most expensive part of the process is this, because these laboratories have to keep producing baby oysters and they need a lot of plankton. Even though they have thousands of oysters sitting in water, they have to pull them out once in a while to inspect, first of all, if they're alive, and to make sure they are not ill, and then they put them back in the water. Once a month, they have to pull these out for 5 years to make sure they're good. And since they have so much oysters in the water, they always are constantly checking on them. And even some of the oysters that have built up gunk, they have to be cleaned. Just like other gemstones, the quality of the pearl is the most important thing. And the most important thing is the color. The larger, the more sphere, and the most beautiful color has the highest price. There are other countries that produce pearl, like Japan, Australia, Myanmar, China, India, Philippines, and Thailand. You might say, what about the Persian Gulf? Because they have a hot market about pearls. In terms of history, the best pearl you could find is from the island of Bahrain. But unfortunately, in the 20th century, when they struck oil in the Persian Gulf, they stopped looking for oysters, and that means they stopped looking for pearls. And the reality is, the people of this area got rich and they stopped worrying about pearls. And that is why the Persian Gulf pearl industry died. Pearl is the only gemstone that is produced inside an animal's body, and it's not like any other gemstone that's produced only in Earth's crust. You have to know that real pearl in the world is extremely rare. More than 99% of the pearl you see are artificial fake ones. All the pearls you would see until 1896 were all legit. And then this year, a Japanese nan by the name of Mikimoto Kochichi creates the first artificial pearl. He basically produced a pearl-looking stone that's not real and much cheaper. After Mikimoto, a lot of different countries learned this method, and they did the same thing. In ancient Rome, they would use pearl for bedding because it was something small and it was something high value. The oldest pearl in the world was found in the United Arab Emirates, a pearl that was 7,500 years old, and it was a form of jewelry made by ancient humans. After this date, a lot of ancient Egyptians also used pearls. In the old times, pearls were no joke, and every pearl you would see was legit. And the cool part is, 1 in every 10,000 oysters you can find the pearl in. In ancient times, pearls was considered more expensive than diamond and gold because it was extremely rare to find, and it wasn't like nowadays where they could farm it with technology. Diamond is the hardest thing in the world, but pearls are not hard whatsoever, and it's one of the softest gemstones in the world. It's not soft as in terms of you can crush it, but you could easily scratch it and ruin how it looks like. So how can we get to know real pearls? We are no pearl experts, but we did research it on the internet. First of all, real pearls are always heavier than fake ones because it's a stone. A real pearl is never a perfect sphere. A fake one, the color never changes in the light, but a natural one always changes color. When you have 2 pieces of pearl in normal temperature, the real one will have a cooler feel than the fake one because it will feel warm. So how is fake pearls made? Everything has to do with the quality of the fake pearl. It could be a form of glass, which is the best kind. It could be ceramic. And the cheapest form of pearl is made up of plastic. So how can we test it in a lab? Experts say, first, rub the pearl on your teeth, and if it feels like sandpaper, then it's real. But unfortunately, in recent times, they have added a form of sandpaper feel to the fake ones as well. In this case, it could only be verified using a microscope. When you look at a piece of pearl under the microscope, you could see the build quality. And if it's too perfect, you could tell that it's a fake piece. But if it's natural, you could tell by the way it's built. Once again, we're talking about gemstones. We've made 4 different videos about the precious gemstones: diamonds, emerald, ruby, and sapphire. But now we want to talk about regular gemstones, and there is plenty of them. One of the most famous gemstones you could find everywhere is turquoise. Turquoise has a beautiful, unique color between blue and green, but it's mostly blue, and the color is so famous that it's known as the stone name. So they call this color turquoise color rather than sky blue, and that's all because of this unique color you see on the stone. So what is turquoise made up of? This is the formula, and it's mostly phosphate, copper, and aluminum. This stone starts in Persia and it moves to the Ottoman Empire, and from Ottoman Empire it enters Europe, and that is why it's called turquoise. It literally means Turkish in French, and that is why in the English language it's still considered turquoise. You probably noticed, but diamonds are the hardest material on earth, and emerald, ruby, and sapphire is right next to it. Turquoise is also a very hard material, but not that hard. You could compare it to like glass. It's very hard and easily breaks. When you look at gemstones, especially the precious gemstones, light passes through them and they shine. But because of the structure of this stone, no light passes through it. Turquoise is one of the first gemstones that was used by ancient civilization all over the world. This stone was even used in ancient America thousands of years ago, and it's always been used even till recently. The most amount of turquoise you'll find is in ancient Egypt, the Aztecs, and most of all, the Persian Empire. The Achaemenid Persian Empire used this stone, and it went to India and China through Iran. But at that time, it doesn't go to Europe, and then eventually, thousands of years later in the 14th century, it enters Europe through the Ottoman Empire. Historians cannot believe it. Even though the Aztecs, the Egyptians, the Persians all used turquoise, why did the Europeans get to know the stone extremely late? And it's interesting to know that the last place to get to know turquoise gemstone was Japan. Like, do you see this? This is a mask made with turquoise, and it's considered god of fire in Aztec. The mask was built in the 13th century, and unfortunately, it's not in Mexico or Central America anymore. It's in the British Museum. This is the mask of Tutankhamun, one of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. This is much older than the Aztec mask, more than 3,300 years. A mask made from pure gold with 4 gemstones on it. The turquoise is very obvious. Then we got lapis, carnelian, and the black is obsidian, also known as volcanic glass. This mask is in the Cairo Museum, and since it was found in 1925 and the Egyptians had control of their country, the British weren't able to take this one, so it stayed in Cairo. Before we move on, just look at this mask. It seems like the ancient pharaohs of Egypt had a CNC machine. The quality of work is amazing. What do you guys think? In ancient Iran, a lot of turquoise was used in building. Like when you go to Safavid era in Isfahan, turquoise is used a lot around the building, especially the mosque dome. And we can't forget about the interior. It is written that Shah Abbas the Great paid 20,000 tuman for this mosque to be built, and it took 18 years for this to be built. 20,000 tumans is a lot. We're talking about over 400 years ago. Ancient Egyptians believed that if you have a necklace around your neck made of turquoise, you will be safe forever. This belief made its way to the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and they would also wear turquoise necklaces. And another interesting thing is, Persian soldiers that used the sword would also wear a turquoise bracelet, and they believe it would keep them safe in battle because it's on their hand. So why is this stone so precious? 99% of the love for this stone is this unique, beautiful color, and of course the rarity has made this piece much more valuable. When this stone gets to Europe, the philosophers fall in love, and they would tell people it could help you focus a lot better and it helps clear your mind. We're just telling you other people's belief. We're not telling you if it's true or not. In Tibet, turquoise is very holy, and they believe if you have the stone, you will be rich. Just like we said, turquoise is very fragile, and if you have any jewelry made of turquoise, you have to be careful and you don't damage it or hit it anywhere because it will crack. Turquoise specialists say you have to take care of the stone. Like for example, if you have a ring, you have to make sure you don't get oil on it. Don't use wax or grease on it, and it shouldn't contact too much sweat to begin with. And if it does contact it, it will change its color to a much uglier form. Where can you find turquoise in the world? This is the turquoise map of the world. The most amount of turquoise you can find is in the United States. And in Egypt, Iran, and China, there's plenty as well. But the most beautiful and most valuable turquoise is in Neyshabur, Iran. A lot of ancient buildings in Neyshabur are built with turquoise, like these monuments, and the blue you're seeing is made from turquoise. Turquoise was Iran's country stone for a very long time, and that is why it was used on plenty of buildings. From different buildings, different jewelry, and many more. Except Neyshabur, Semnan, and Kerman has plenty of turquoise. Since we're in this place, let's learn what the name of the city means. The original name was Neyshabur, and it means New Shapur. And the main reason was that Shapur I of the Sassanid Empire started this city, and in the Sasanian Empire, it was known as the second city of the country. A beautiful gemstone that has a unique green color to it. This type of rock is actually pretty old on planet Earth, and the oldest piece of emerald that has been found has an age of 2,970,000,000 years. And that shows us about 3 billion years ago, this beautiful rock was being formed in Earth's crust. The first time this type of rock has been used by humans was about 1500 BC in ancient Egypt. It's also interesting to know that Cleopatra's favorite jewelry was emerald, and this has been written in history. Emerald is very famous around the world because it goes from Africa to the Middle East, then India, and then Europe. People around the world slowly fall in love with this stone and kind of make it a precious gemstone. Time passes and we get to the 16th century when the Spanish conquest starts and they want to go to South America. This is the time where the Inca Empire is being taken over by the Spanish, and we've made a video on it. When the Spanish entered the Inca Empire, they realized that these people used emerald as jewelry as well. And you could say they were surprised to find this type of jewelry on them. But they didn't know that part of the Inca Empire, which is known as Colombia today, they have the most amount of emerald. On the other hand, the Spanish were very happy to find this type of mine. They would steal all the emerald from the Incas and send it to Europe to sell it. Even though there's plenty of emerald in South America, especially Colombia, but in the northern part of America, there is barely any emerald. Like we said earlier, emerald is part of 1 out of 4 precious gemstones. And just like its name, it's very precious because there's only 4 of them. And as you can see, we got diamond, emerald, ruby, and sapphire. You might say there's hundreds of gemstones all around the world with different colors, but that's not right because these are the only 4 that are considered precious gemstones, and the regular stones are considered gemstones, which is considered a little tier lower under precious gemstones. So what is emerald made out of? Like what elements? Clearly, emerald is not made from one element, and this is the formula. So emerald is a mix of beryllium, aluminum, and silicate. And the reason it's green is because of 2 other elements. One of those is chromium and vanadium. If you put 1 carat of emerald next to 1 carat of diamond, the diamond will be smaller because it weighs more. You probably noticed, but diamond is the hardest object on the planet. But don't underestimate emerald. Emerald is not as hard as diamond, but it's extremely hard. And just like diamond, it could be shattered very easily. And if you want to work on it like diamonds, they will charge an extra fee because they have to handle with care. And if they don't, it will easily shatter. More than 50% of the emerald used today comes from the country of Colombia. Back in the day, people believed that when you have emerald, you will have a clean, easy life, and the demons will not come and hunt you. In ancient Greece, they would respect emerald heavily. It seems like there's a lot of made-up stories about emerald in ancient history. There's writings from ancient Greece that says if you put emerald underneath your tongue, you could see the future. You could say the beautiful, peaceful green color of this rock made a lot of positive stories be made up around it. Like some people in Israel believe that the foundation of Jerusalem is made from emerald, which is probably not true. Even Westerners have a lot of writing about emerald. Religious people from the US and Europe believe that if you wear emerald jewelry, you will not get Alzheimer's disease. But unfortunately, none of this has been proven with science. Just like a piece of diamond, the quality of the emerald is all that matters. And it's good to know that the highest quality of emeralds are even more expensive than diamonds. So how can you appraise a piece of emerald? When a professional wants to appraise a piece, they look at 4 things. First of all, it's the color. Then it's the clarity. Third, it's the cut. If it's cut correctly, the value goes up. And obviously, the 4th factor they look at is the weight of the stone. But out of all these 4, one of them is the most important, and that sets the real price. That's the color of the stone. All emeralds are green, but we have way too many different types of green. The more beautiful of a green it is, the more expensive it's gonna be. When you look at the most expensive piece of emerald, you see that it's not too light and it's not too dark. It's just the perfectly shaded green rock. When a jeweler wants to take a close look at a piece of diamond, they have to use a loupe, but you could inspect a piece of emerald with the naked eye. This is the biggest piece of emerald that has been found on Earth. It weighs 1,383 carat, which is about 276.78 grams. So where is this stone? In the year 1831, this rock belonged to Pedro I, Emperor of Brazil. But in the year 1831, William Cavendish, the 6th Duke of Devonshire, realized that Pedro I has the biggest piece of emerald, and he requested to purchase it from him. This rock was found in Colombian mine, but they don't know if it belonged to the Incas or the Spanish actually found it in the mine. This amazing piece is in the London Museum, and anyone can go and look at it. This is the map of emerald mines around the earth, and the bigger the dot, the bigger the mine. And as you can see, Colombia is the biggest one. You could see in southern Africa there's 3 of them, and we also have it in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Back in the day, there were plenty of rumors and fake stories around gemstone, and one of the most famous ones, that they used emerald for medicine. A lot of ancient doctors believe when you boil emerald, it's good for you. One of the most famous ones are the Ottoman Empire doctors, and they believe if you boil emerald, it will help you cure cancer, and it could even fix explosive diarrhea. Ancient Greece would also use it for a cold or other types of viruses, but nowadays we all know that these were all fake stories, and none of them is actually scientifically proven. But one thing was interesting. Before magnifying glass or even glasses were invented, people that didn't have a strong vision could buy a piece of emerald and use it like a magnifying glass. Sapphire, the 4th and final precious gemstone we're making a video about. We've made a video of the other 4, diamond, emerald, ruby, and this video is sapphire. The word sapphire came from a Greek word sapphiris. You might not believe it, but the reason this stone has this beautiful color is because of aluminum oxide, and this is the formula. Even though most of it is made up of aluminum oxide, but there are certain elements that make up this beautiful color. Elements like iron, titanium, vanadium, and magnesium. Most of the time, sapphires are blue colored, but there are yellow sapphires, purple ones, orange ones, and green ones, but these are very rare compared to the blue one. It is good to know that sapphires and rubies are under the same family and they're very similar. Just like we've previously said, diamonds are the hardest materials on earth. Ruby is 2nd place, and 3rd place we have sapphires. Let's see where we can find sapphires around the world. There are 3 main mines on planet Earth, and they're located in Sri Lanka, Tanzania, and Madagascar. These 3 are the biggest mines for sapphires around the world, but you can find mines in Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, India, and Australia. Just like other precious gemstones, there are things that go in order to value a piece. One of the most important ones is the cut, the size, the clarity, and most importantly, the color. It has to be a particular blue that shines the light into it. It can't be too dark that it looks black, and it can't be too light where it's light blue. Just like other jewelry, it has to have a certificate to be legitimate, and inside the certificate, it has to state which mine the stone came from, on what date, and who cut it and polished it. And obviously they have to certify that it's a legit piece, because it's very easy to create the same type of stone in a laboratory. They're exactly the same quality, but one is real and one is not. Even though the lab created one is more perfect, but it's much cheaper, and sometimes it's 10 times cheaper. We can say the same thing about diamond. Like for example, you could have a $30,000 diamond, but if you have a lab created one that looks exactly the same, it will cost around $3,000. But this is a new technology that allows us to create these beautiful pieces inside a lab, and it will have the quality of the natural stone. If you compare sapphires and rubies, which are red, usually the sapphire will be more expensive. If they're the same weight, the same quality, usually somebody will pay more for the sapphire. There are also bicolor sapphires that are very rare, and even though if you find a high quality one that looks beautiful, it won't be as valuable as the pure blue one. If you remember in our videos, we said that light red rubies are less valuable than deep red rubies, and jewelers in America have changed the name from light red ruby to pink rubies, and this allows selling it and marketing it much easier and more desirable. It's also good to know that these jewelers sometimes refer to these stones as pink sapphires, and you could say this isn't really their name, even though it matches it, but it's mostly used to sell that piece of stone easier. There's also another version of sapphires called star sapphires, and the reason for the name is there's literally a star stain inside the piece and it shines like a star. You might not know this, but the white stain you see inside the sapphire is made up of titanium dioxide, and it has been set there millions of years ago. In our video, we said rubies and emeralds were created on Earth about 3 billion years ago, and this is the same for sapphires. What you're seeing is the structure of a piece of sapphire, and the red ones are oxides, the white ones are aluminum. And we said in the beginning, most of a sapphire is made up of aluminum oxide. In ancient Greece, the Greeks believed that sapphires get rid of bad energy inside someone's body, and the Hindus also believe something similar. Christian bishops also love sapphire ring, and they believe it brings good energy to your life if you have a sapphire ring. Another place sapphire is used is the glass of expensive watches. The glass is made up of sapphire, but synthetic sapphire, and the main reason is that it's very hard, it does not scratch, and it makes the watch more luxurious. Rolex has been using these sapphire glasses on their watch since 1978. And it's also good to know that Apple Watches use a similar type of glass. The main reason they use this glass on an Apple Watch is that the user has to touch the glass all the time, so they had to use the most comfortable and durable glass they could find. After Princess Diana married Prince Charles, she didn't ask for a diamond ring, but asked for a sapphire ring. And after this, sapphire got a lot of attention, and it became a lot more popular than it was before. The biggest piece of uncut sapphire that has been found is this, and it's also a star sapphire, and because of that, it's called the Star of Adam. It weighs at around 1400 carats, which is around 281 grams. The most interesting part is that this was recently found in the year 2015 in the south of Sri Lanka. The day it was found, the British were not around to steal it from them, so it remains in the Museum of Sri Lanka. Experts have estimated the value around $300 million, and they believe if this stone actually goes to auction, it will bring a figure close to that. This was the biggest uncut sapphire, but which one is the biggest cut one? This is the biggest cut piece, and it's called the Logan Sapphire. This was also found in Sri Lanka, and it's 423 carats, and that's around 84.5 grams. Jewelers believe that the perfect color for a sapphire is this, a perfect amount of blue. The way this stone made its way to America from Sri Lanka is very weird. In the beginning of the 20th century, a New York City jeweler decided to go to Sri Lanka to buy some sapphires, and when he returns, he has this piece with him. They asked him, "How did you bring this piece here?" He was told that someone had stolen this piece from a mine, and then they kill him, but he never explained how he got it. At around that time, Sri Lanka was not in a good position, so they didn't really know what was going on in the country. Few years later, a wealthy Baghdadi Jewish family that remained in India called the Sassoon family buy this piece from the New York jeweler that brought it to America, and they never announced the price. When World War II begins, the Sassoon family send this stone to New York to auction it off. It does not sell in the first auction. Some months go by, and an American by the name of Robert Guggenheim realizes that this piece is in New York and gives his offer to the Sassoon family. It was also not announced how much Guggenheim bought it for, but he bought it, and it's still in the US since then. In the year 1960, Robert Guggenheim, owner of this sapphire, dies, and his family decided to donate it to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., an institute that's under the US government. Since the sellers and buyers never announced a figure, nobody really knows what's the true value of this piece. Some experts believe for a piece this size and this beautiful, you're gonna have to pay about $200,000 per carat, which comes out to about $17 million. But a lot of others say that there is no way you can buy this piece for that cheap, and it will bring a much larger figure. This was the last and fourth precious gemstone that we introduced to you guys. And after this, we're gonna move to regular gemstones, and there are plenty of those. Once again, we're back talking about gemstones. In this video, we want to talk about amber, which has a lot of different names depending on where you're from. Amber is an ancient Persian word for this stone, and that is why in English you call it amber. Of course you already knew this, but in English speaking countries, some orange colors are called amber. So that's also another way they use this word. Amber is not really a stone. Stones are basically dirt that has been compacted for millions of years, and will eventually get so hard that it turns into stones, different stones throughout the world. But the thing that makes up amber is not dirt, it's actually tree resin. A tree resin that has had a lot of pressure on it, and after millions of years, we have it in this form. Amber is one of the first gemstones throughout history, meaning it was adapted by humans for its beautifulness. So that means about 10,000 BC, meaning 12,000 years ago, humans have been using amber to make themselves look good. Anything that has life on Earth, it will evolve to be better and better, what we call evolution. This is not only seen in different animals, it's also seen in plants. The reason living things evolve is to make their lives easier for survival and just easier as a whole, so you can enjoy it. Like for a tree to protect itself, it grows very thick bark, or it will create spikes so you can't damage it or even touch it. And in some cases, instead of doing all that, some tree gave out resin. About 50 million years ago, the family of pine trees started giving resin out to their bark, and this was kind of its protection, but not against animal. What can resin do to protect itself? Is a tiger not gonna attack it? Is a bear not gonna climb it? Crocodile? No, it's not meant for any of that. It's actually meant for small insects, and it wants to prevent them from making holes inside the body and coming in and destroying the tree within. So pine trees evolved. They gave out these resins so bugs won't attack them. The resin is actually produced in the center of the trunk itself, and it slowly seeps its way throughout the skin and comes out. When the resin is contacted with the air outside, it gets hard and just stays there as a protective shield. If you compare a tree to a car, you could imagine this resin on the tree's body is like a clear coat on a car's paint, because without it, the paint is all gonna chip away or fade in the sun. The resin also gives it some play, and that means if an insect comes and sits on it and starts biting it, it's actually not hard for it to break off. It's gonna be like glue where it just plays around instead of break off. And that means not only can a bug not insert the tree trunk, it can't even damage it or even scratch it. What is this resin made up of anyways? It's basically made up of oil, alcohol, and acid. When it comes out and it's confronted with air, the organic material of it goes away, and that means it can stay there forever without rotting. If the organic material was left on it, it would actually go bad, but it exits out and this doesn't actually take place. So the resin gets hard outside the tree, and now we have the amber gemstone, right? But it's not that easy, because that's still resin and very soft. It's gonna need a few million years before that actually turns into a gemstone. For a resin to actually turn into amber, it has to be somewhere safe, like a tree that has been buried underground in dirt, or a tree that has been broken and it's inside a river, somewhere there's no oxygen and nobody bothers it. You can find pine trees everywhere, so that means you can find amber everywhere in the world, right? You can find them everywhere, but some places there's plenty more than others. Some places, the resin of a pine tree has turned into amber much more frequently. And these places don't really actually have any pine trees there left because it was in the ancient times. And most of these places have turned into lakes and seas. These rivers, seas, and lakes kept these things safe, didn't allow oxygen to hit them, and allowed it and gave it time for the amber to actually form. One of the most common places you can find amber is next to the Baltic Sea, next to Scandinavia. And until recent times, it was actually land. And by recent time, we mean 500,000 years ago. But based on Earth's age, it's actually like yesterday. This sea used to be a rainforest with a bunch of rivers flowing through it. And most importantly, it had a lot of pine trees. For millions of years, these pine trees would break and get dumped into these rivers, and they stayed there for a very long time. Throughout times, these rivers got bigger and bigger and joined each other and created bigger rivers, and eventually it turned into the sea, the Baltic Sea. Baltic Sea is actually not a deep sea whatsoever like the Caspian Sea, where the south side is a kilometer deep. The average depth of the Baltic Sea is only 55 meters, which is nothing. There is so much amber in the seabed of this sea that it slowly washes away and comes to different beaches. The people that collect amber stones like to hang around the Baltic Sea because it's more plentiful than other places. It has been more than 1,000 years that the people that lived here loved amber, and it's kind of in their tradition and in their culture now. But you can't only find amber inside the Baltic, you can find them in plenty of other places. The second place for amber is in the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean. You could also find it in the beaches of Lebanon and France. But in the Baltic, it's the most common place. How can you find amber anyways? Do you just walk on the beach and find the stone? It's not like you can just find it on the ground. There has to be waves coming towards the beach for the amber to wash up. Most importantly, the wind direction matters in which country you're from. Like for example, Poland is one of the countries that's in the southern part of the Baltic Sea. And that means if you want to go on the beach on this country and find amber, the wind has to be blowing this way. Collecting amber is actually easier at night, but you're gonna need a UV light. If you have a UV light, you could easily see the amber stone at night compared to during the day where it's actually very hard to see. Nowadays, people that collect amber around the Baltic Sea always have a UV light and they go searching at night. It's not like you go there every night and you take an amber and go home. If that was the case, it wouldn't actually be a gemstone. It's going to be much more rarer to find it. It has been millions of years that amber has been laying on the ocean floor, And that day you decide to walk on the beach looking for this precious stone. And on that day, it releases. The wind blows towards the beach and actually washes up for you to find it. So luck has to be on your side that day. Some insect got stuck in this tree resin millions of years ago and got stuck there forever and fossilized. 1 in every 1,000 ambers found has an insect or a living creature that has been stuck in there for a very long time. So it's much more rare, and that means it's more valuable depending on which insect it is. Of course, the insect has to matter. If it's very common throughout ambers, it's not going to have that much value. But if it's something rare and they want to experiment on it, it's going to be much more expensive than a normal one. But let's forget about the ones with the insect in it that is very expensive. How much does a normal amber cost? An amber could have a price of $20 and it could go higher until it's $40,000. Of course, the color matters, the clarity, the size, but that doesn't end there because amber could be much more expensive than $40,000. The most expensive amber that has been sold in the world is this, called the Blue Dragon Amber, and it's sold for $6.5 million. When you compare this price to precious gemstone prices, the 4 most expensive ones, amber blows them out of the park.